Hey everyone, back again here with video number two. Countering Christianity. After my last video gave me a new passage to go ahead and look at for the synoptic problem. And here's what I'd like to say. I gave up on this twice, meaning trying to plot this passage in Excel via the Greek. That is how complicated and crazy this is. So I let that sink in. If there's just verbatim copying, which is what people imply with the synoptic problem, this would have been very easy to do. So anyway, check this out. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And by the way, I'm really mostly interested in skeptics' take on this. So this video is really made for Countering Christianity, Stephen Ford, Isaac Coverstone, Trey Brickley, Lars Cade. If people who, believe in the Gospels and the resurrection want to chime in, that's fine. Like, for example, David Paulman, I'm mostly interested in watching your videos on Matthean priority versus Markan priority. But if you want to comment on this, that's totally fine. But anyway, I'm giving the synoptic problem an honest look. And I'm noticing something fascinating. People are believing things that they have not verified for themselves. So, for example, I'm going to read you guys a quote from Stephen Ford. He says to me, dude, 80% of Mark is identical in Matthew and Luke. That's flat false. Now, I don't know where you got that, Stephen Ford, but I'm guessing you either came up with that number just by looking at English translations or you heard it from somewhere, but wherever that came from, it's just completely false. And so I'd encourage everybody, and I hope this video is like the beginning of you looking into this, but just look at the Greek text for yourself. It's fascinating. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I color coded this to make it way easier than last time. For everybody to see what's going on. And you're going to see how unbelievably messy this is. And all I have is one simple request. My request is just please explain to me. And again, I didn't choose this passage. Please explain to me what you see here. I just want to know what you see. Now, check this out. I color coded this. So green is when Matthew, Mark, and Luke have the exact same Greek word. Blue is when Matthew and Mark only have the same Greek word. Red is when Mark and Luke have the same Greek word. And then this yellowish color is when Matthew and Luke have the same word. So at the beginning, so we're looking here down here in the left corner, we're looking at Matthew 16, 24 to 28, Mark 8, 34 to Mark 9, 1, and Luke 9, 23 to 27. Well, as you'll notice here, the beginning is a complete mess. There's almost no agreement whatsoever. That's what black represents. We've got like 4 words here, right here, that are not in the same place. But these 4 words are in agreement with Matthew and Mark. Okay, great. So when you see 4 words in a sentence, and Matthew and Mark agree, what conclusion are you coming to? That's what I want to know. In the same sentence, here we've got 2 words, a and tis, that are in agreement between Matthew and Luke. Same sentence. So when you see 4 words that agree in a sentence from Matthew and Mark and 2 words that agree in Matthew and Luke, how do you interpret that? Then we have a big chunk here where we have agreement in all 3. When you see agreement in all 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what conclusion are you coming to? What I'm hearing in the comments in the Facebook group is that everybody's copying Mark. Okay, great. Please show me why you're coming to that conclusion. And again, if you're just going to tell me some scholar said that, that's not going to work for me. I just want to look at this together. And I want to understand, when you look at the Greek, why do you say they are copying Mark? Where are you seeing them copying Mark? All right. Again, massive agreement here between the 3 of them with an exception here. So here we have Luke adding 2 words, kath hemeron. So I'm curious, when Luke adds 2 words, we have a big chunk here. As you can see, a lot of green on the screen. We have a big chunk where Matthew, Mark, and Luke agree verbatim, and then Luke adds 2 words. What is your conclusion as to why Luke is adding 2 words? Then, as you're going to notice here, this big green chunk ends here, but then Uh, Mark now adds in 3 words that Matthew and Luke do not. So again, when there's a big chunk where Matthew, Mark, and Luke agree, and at the beginning of the chunk, Luke adds 2 words, and at the end of the chunk, Mark adds 3 words, what conclusion are you coming to? Just help me understand your thinking. Now you're going to see this whole thing gets incredibly messy. So we have like 2 sentences. It's really half of one sentence and half of another where there's a lot of agreement. So if you look at my screen right now, you see a lot of green, but then it gets bizarre. Check this out. All of a sudden, now we have red. What is red? Red is when Mark and Luke agree. Back to green. Then in the same sentence, we have this yellowish color, which is a Matthew and Luke agreement. Then we go to blue, which is where Matthew and Mark agree. Back to green, back to blue, back to yellow, back to blue. That is wild to me. I just want someone to give me a logical explanation as to why in the same sentence would Matthew, Mark, and Luke agree, then only Matthew and Luke, then only Matthew and Mark, back to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, back to just Matthew and Mark, then back to Matthew and Luke, and then back to Matthew and Mark. What are you seeing? Because I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing obvious synoptic problem. I'm not seeing obvious Mark and priority here. So what are you seeing? Then we get an interesting thing. We have a long stretch here where Matthew and Mark agree, which is why it's blue, and Luke is completely absent. It's not that he's using different words. He doesn't even state it. So what does that mean? And again, what is your conclusion when you see this? What stands out to you as that must be the case? Then we go back to red here, which is Mark and Luke agreeing. One word is green. That's it. Gar, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then back to red. So now we just have Mark and Luke agreeing with one another and Matthew kind of doing his own thing. And then we have another huge chunk of Luke who doesn't say anything at all. And then Mark has a huge chunk where he doesn't say anything at all. And Matthew and Luke are. And then we get a huge chunk where Matthew doesn't say anything at all. And Mark and Luke are. And so Mark and Luke are then in somewhat of an agreement with red. So if you noticed here, we have a huge section where Luke doesn't say anything here and here. Then we have a huge section here where Mark doesn't say anything. Then we have a huge section here and here where Matthew doesn't say anything. What does this all mean? This to me, as David Paulman likes to say, seems to be a puzzle, but I'm not seeing an obvious verbatim copying synoptic problem going on. So please tell me what I'm missing. And again, I didn't pick this passage. This was given to me by Countering Christianity as some obvious copying going on. And then we get to the end here. Here's the last sentence of this passage. It starts blue, so we only have agreement between Matthew and Mark, goes green, so that's agreement with all 3. Then it goes black. Here we don't have agreement by any of them. Back to green for 5 words. 1 word is agreement between Mark and Luke. Then we have 7 words where we have all 3 agreement. Then we have 4 words where it's only Mark and Luke. And then the rest is all different. So think about this. In one sentence, we go from Matthew and Mark agreeing to all 3, to none of them, to all 3, to Mark and Luke, to all 3, to Mark and Luke, to none of them in one sentence. So again, I just personally think, based on the comments I'm reading, not just in this group, but on Facebook in general in theology groups, when people talk about the synoptic problem, I feel like they've never seen what I'm showing you right now. They've never seen it laid out like this in the Greek so you can actually see it. I think what they're seeing is either someone throwing English versions together and saying, look, these are verbatim, or they're reading books by scholars. And again, that's fine if they're scholars, and just taking what the scholars are saying with a grain of salt. This project right here literally took me days, and it was multiple hours each day because it was so difficult to put together, because it wasn't just verbatim copying. So again, please, all I ask is that people help me understand, when you see agreement between Matthew and Mark, what is that telling you? When you see agreement between Mark and Luke, what is that telling you? When you see agreement between Matthew and Luke, what is that telling you? And when you see agreement in all 3, what does that tell you? And lastly, when there's no agreement in the middle of a sentence by any of the 3, what does that tell you? In my opinion, and again, I'm still open to agreeing that there's some sort of a synoptic problem here, but I just want to understand what's leading you to the conclusion. Here's my fear. My fear is what's leading you to the conclusion that there's a synoptic problem is because you're a skeptic, and because you want to be skeptical of the gospels, and because you want to poke holes in the gospels. And so you're just like, I'm going to latch on to anything that I hear anybody say. And so if some scholar out there says, oh, this guy copied this guy, so therefore it's not multiple independent witnesses or whatever, I feel like you're just jumping on that and just being like, I don't want the New Testament to be true, therefore I'm going to do that. So please, once you have a chance to look at this, and the reason I put this into Excel, and I'll email this to anybody if you want, but the reason I shared my screen here so you can pause and you can literally go look and check my work. I triple checked it. I don't think there's any mistakes in it. And then just tell me what you're seeing. And I fear it's going to be difficult to make a case for something, whether it's I believe without a doubt that Matthew copied Mark. If that's what you believe, cool. Show me that here. Because if you go to a place where Matthew and Mark agree, great, but then you're going to have to explain why there's places where Matthew and Mark don't, and why there's places that Mark and Luke do, and there's places where Matthew and Luke do. So it's very problematic. All the colors really help, I think, bring this together. So anyway, hopefully that helps. I appreciate you guys challenging me, and I try to be a man of my word. And so when I said, if you show me an example of the synoptic problem, I will look at it. I literally did. I looked at it in the Greek. I mapped it out. And here's where I stand. So again, I'm not closer yet to the synoptic problem, but let me hear your thoughts. Thanks so much.